Here we go with the first set of notes in our taxonomy and plankton unit. This is going to be the first half, kind of a short unit, but the first half of notes focusing on the taxonomy aspect of it. So to begin with, we need to define what is taxonomy. Not to be confused with taxidermy, of course, which is stuffing the head of your deer that you shot this season or whatever, but taxonomy is a branch of science. That's the grouping of organisms based on their similarities mostly. And then nowadays we're doing it a lot more with DNA evidence, and then that leads us to evolutionary relationships. This was first done by Aristotle, which is this guy over here, long time ago. If you guys remember, he was an ancient Greek, and he wanted to classify all life that he could find. Of course, he's just working in the Mediterranean world, and it was a small fraction of life. But considering the progress of science at that point, it was a pretty bold undertaking, and so it was pretty cool. And it kind of changed throughout the years. He had a basic understanding of organisms, and we were using his system, kind of classifying things as whether or not they're plants or animals, and not really all that specific. And some animals are kind of hard to classify. And so it got harder and harder as we discovered more organisms scientifically. So along comes this guy here, named Carolus Linnaeus, and he starts basically the modern system of classification, the Linnaean system of classification. Basically because he realizes that Aristotle did a good job, but it wasn't nearly specific enough for all of the things that we wanted to do, all the organisms that we wanted to classify, and all the things we wanted to do with those classifications. So what Linnaeus did to classify all life is he kind of broke things down into different levels of increasing specificity. So things became more and more specific. He actually didn't have the 8 levels that we're going to talk about now. He had fewer. And even in reality, there's a lot more than 8. There's a lot of sub-levels that we're not going to really worry about too much. But basically, you've got these 8 levels, and they start off as very general. Okay, so the first level we're going to learn about is the domain. This is actually a relatively new level of classification. This is going to be the least specific level, so meaning it's going to have the greatest number of species. So for example, one of the domains is eukarya. So these are eukaryotes. If you remember back to your biology 1, eukaryotes are all cells that have a nucleus and organelles and things like that. That's pretty broad. That can include things like these little paramecia. It includes fungi. It includes plants. It includes us. It includes a lot of stuff. Right? But as we increase our levels of classification, we're going to increase our specificity as well. So as we move down through, next step we would come to kingdom. So in this case, in kingdom Animalia, this is everything that is an animal. So we're going to drop out, we're going to lose the plants, we're going to lose the fungi, we're going to lose these protists, and everything we have left is animals. And we keep going down. The next one is phylum, and then class, order, family, genus, and then species. So species is going to be the most specific level of classification, and there's really only going to be just one organism. So if you look over here, we already talked about Animalia. We go down to the next phylum, which is Chordata. So these are things that have a backbone. Right? So we lost our sea star. He doesn't have a backbone. And then within these, we can break it down further into things that are mammals. Okay, snake, you go away, you're cold-blooded. And then within mammals, we can go down even further to carnivores. All right, squirrel, go eat your nuts over here. And then even more specific types of carnivores, in this case, bears. Okay? And then even more specific form of bears. And then finally, the very most specific is the last one, is one specific species, the grizzly bear. Right? So he belongs to all of these categories up here, but these guys don't belong to all the categories as we move down. So at this point in time, I would like you guys to pause the video and come up with a mnemonic device that will help you remember the 8 levels of taxonomic classification. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now, this is a guaranteed test question. List in order from most general to most specific the 8 levels of taxonomic classification. You will see it on your test. I do want you to know them in order. So take this time to come up with a mnemonic device. In case you forget what a mnemonic device is, you would come up with a sentence, and where the first letter of each word is going to be the first letter of each word that you're trying to remember. So in our case, you're trying to remember the different levels of taxonomic classification, so your first letters are going to be domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So you're going to come up with a sentence where the first word is D, the second word starts with a K, third word starts with a P, and so on and so forth. So go ahead and pause and do this, and then before you move on to the next sentence, the next slide, leave some space, because we're going to talk about these in class, and then we're going to have people share, and you might find one that's better than yours. So go ahead and do that now. Another aspect of scientific classification that Linnaeus introduced to us was scientific name. So everything has a common name, like the grizzly bear, but it also has its very specific scientific name, Ursus maritimus in that case. And the scientific name, all it is the genus and the species of that organism, so the two levels of its classification, the two most specific levels of classification. Why do we use the language of Latin? Because Latin is not changing, right? Nobody speaks Latin anymore. It's kind of like even Steven, no country gets offended that they're using English or they're using French or whatever. Just using Latin, it's not changing at all anymore. It helps us to reduce the confusion of common names. Something like the grizzly bear, okay, well that's pretty easy to tell, but if you said something like the golden butterfly, well, the golden butterfly in Oregon might be very different from what a golden butterfly is in Pakistan. They both have the same common name, but they're really, really very, very different butterflies. Their scientific names would be different. Whenever you're writing this, the genus is capitalized and the species is not, and then we also do it in italics if you want to be official. So for example, Homo sapiens, this is us, the genus is Homo, the species is sapiens, and it's in italics. So what are some of the advantages of this system? Well, the primary one, which we kind of just talked about, is it reduces confusion because everything's in the common language and all scientists use this. It's not like the French have their own system and the Indians have their own system. No, everybody uses this same system worldwide. So with that also comes increased communication. Right? So again, because it's different languages, or the same language, even though we all speak different languages, that doesn't really matter. Scientists can communicate. A chordate is a chordate is a chordate, and everybody knows what you're talking about. It also increases your knowledge because the categories are based on similarities. If you know something about one organism within a category, you know something about all the other organisms in the category. For example, if something belongs to the order Carnivora, well, you probably know something about it, right? If it's a carnivore, what does its teeth look like? It has sharp, pointy teeth because they eat meat. So if you know something about one, since it's in the same whatever level, you're going to have different levels of similarities based upon how closely they're related. If it's something like the chordata, well, that's not a whole lot of similarity, right? It could just be anything with a backbone, so like us and snakes versus mammals. You know it's going to have fur, you know that it's going to have mammary glands, you know a lot of things about it. So with that wraps up our notes on taxonomy.